HighBridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Burning Shores, Inside the Battle for the New Libya, by Frederic Wehrey. Read by Paul Boehmer. What fury, citizens! What anarchy of iron! Lucan, Civil War. Dramatis Personae. Qadhafi family. Muammar al-Qadhafi, ruler of Libya, 1969 to 2011. Saif al-Islam al-Qadhafi, Western-educated second son of Muammar Qadhafi, captured in 2011. Khamis al-Qadhafi, youngest son of Muammar Qadhafi, commander of an elite military unit, killed in 2011. Americans. Brian Linville, U.S. military attaché in Libya, 2008 to 2012. J. Christopher Stevens, U.S. Special Envoy to the Libyan Opposition, 2011. U.S. Ambassador to Libya, 2012. Killed on September 11, 2012, during an attack on the U.S. diplomatic mission in Benghazi, along with 3 other Americans, Sean Smith, Tyrone Woods, and Glenn Doherty. Deborah Jones, U.S. Ambassador to Libya, 2013 to 2015. Jean Kretz, U.S. Ambassador to Libya, 2008 to 2012. United Nations. Bernardino Leon, head of the United Nations Support Mission in Libya, UNSMIL, 2014 to 2015. Libyan politicians. Mahmoud Jabril, U.S.-educated technocrat under Qadhafi, interim prime minister under the National Transitional Council, head of the National Forces Alliance political gathering. Ali Zaidan, Prime Minister of Libya, 2013 to 2014. Mustafa Abd al-Jalil, former judge under Qadhafi, chairman of the National Transitional Council. Libyan activists. Salwa Bougaygis, human rights lawyer, murdered in Benghazi on June 25, 2014. Wael Gherani, Salwa's son. Iman Bougaygis, Salwa's sister, professor of orthodontics, former spokesperson for the National Transitional Council. Leila Bougaygis, chief medical officer at the Benghazi Medical Center, Salwa's cousin. Fathi Terbil, lawyer representing the families of prisoners killed in the 1996 massacre at Abu Salim prison. His detention helps spark the 2011 uprising. Abd el-Salam al-Mismari, lawyer and activist, assassinated in 2013. Abu Bakr Habib, English school owner in Benghazi and confidant of Ambassador J. Christopher Stevens. Mariam, activist in Derna. Libyan Islamists in Tripoli. Abd al-Rauf Kara, Salafist militia leader in Tripoli, who heads the capital's de facto police and anti-terrorism squad. Abdel Hakim Belhaj, former leader in the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group, LIFG, turned businessman and politician. Misratans. Salim Joha, former army officer and revolutionary leader during the 2011 siege of Misrata. Abd al-Rahman al-Suwaili, Misratan political leader, supporter of the political isolation law and of Libya Dawn. Salah Badi, hardline militia leader in Misrata, a commander of the military forces attacking Tripoli during Libya Dawn. Zintanis. Atman Malekta, former caterer and head of a Zintani militia allied with Hifter. Libyan National Army and Operation Dignity. Khalifa Hifter, former army officer under Qadhafi and dissident residing in the United States. Returns to Libya in 2011 in an unsuccessful bid for military leadership of the anti-Qadhafi rebels. Launches Operation Dignity in Benghazi in 2014. Wanis Bouhamada, commander of the Benghazi-based Thunderbolt Special Forces, joins Operation Dignity in 2014. Abdel Salam al-Hassi, Special Forces General, who serves as a longtime liaison to the Americans during and after the 2011 revolution. Aissam, leader of a pro-dignity militia in Benghazi's Majuri neighborhood. Libyan Federalists. Ibrahim Jadran, Federalist militia leader and head of the Petroleum Facilities Guard who blockades oil facilities in the Gulf of Sirte from 2013 to 2016. Abu Bakr Bera, U.S.-educated Federalist politician. Libyan Islamists in Benghazi and the East. Wissam bin Hamid, former car mechanic, head of the Benghazi Libya Shield 1 militia, later leads the Benghazi revolutionaries' Shura Council against General Hifter's campaign. Fawzi Boukatif, U.S.-educated engineer, Muslim Brotherhood member. His February 17th Brigade militia was contracted to protect the American diplomatic facility in Benghazi. Mohammed al-Gharabi, Islamist and leader of the Rafala al-Sahati Company's militia in Benghazi. Fatih al-Ubaidi, deputy to Wissam bin Hamid, who assists the Americans during the 2012 attack in Benghazi. Tariq, Islamist militia fighter in the Benghazi revolutionaries' Shura Council. Salim Darbi, former jihadist and co-founder of the Abu Salim Martyrs Brigade in Derna, killed fighting the Islamic State. Abdul Hakim al-Hassadi, former jihadist and co-founder of the Abu Salim Martyrs Brigade. Libyan jihadists. Ahmed Abu Khatala, former mechanic and Abu Salim prisoner who leads a jihadist militia in Benghazi, key suspect in the 2012 Benghazi attack, apprehended by the Americans in 2014, tried and convicted in 2017. Muhammad al-Zahawi, leader of the jihadist Ansar al-Sharia militia, killed in 2015. Ahmed, Libyan jihadist in Syria, turned Islamic State fighter. Prologue. From the rocking boat, they could see the lights of Khamnis town shining in the night. They were a few hours out of Benghazi when the motor died, somewhere on the eastern rim of the Gulf of Sidra. It was the onset of dusk. The crew set about repairs, while the dying and wounded waited. Now, in the moonless dark around them, they heard the boom and splash of artillery fired from the shore, and with each lurch and roll, Tariq felt an unbearable pain from his shattered femur. He could hardly believe it had come to this. He was 36 years old and had been born into privilege in England, where his father had been a professor. He'd come back to Benghazi, studying law at the university and entering private practice. In 2011, he was among the first to revolt, joining a group of lawyers, doctors, and academics protesting at the city's courthouse. Then came the fighting against the dictator. Nostalgia had suffused those heady months with more unity than had actually existed among the rebels, but at least they shared a goal. In the years that followed, many of the protesters would be murdered or exiled. Those who remained would join the opposing sides of a war that ravaged the city of the revolution's birth. It was nearly 3 years to the day after the dictator's death when that war came to Tariq's home in Benghazi. He lived in a neighborhood called Tabalino, just north of the university, a well-to-do quarter of cubist villas, iron balustrades, and leafy streets. It was known for private schools and a reputable clinic, all since shuttered. The university was now the front line. One night, a militia made up of young men he'd grown up with and gone to school with attacked Tariq's house. He fled into the desert with his wife and newborn, and then he returned to Benghazi to join the battle. Salvos of artillery and mortars crashed into shops, cafes, and homes. Snipers dueled from windows and balconies. Civilians died in the crossfire. Close-quarter combat happened mostly at night, when infiltration teams tried to slip past sentries. They shouted across the lines at night, "HighBridge," an Islamic term denoting deviance from the faith. How did this happen, Tariq wondered, this dissolution, this unstitching? Benghazi had once been home to all of Libya's outlooks and tribes. The nurse mother to us all, people called it. That was what he was really fighting for, the right to remain and to belong. I'd gone to Benghazi in the fall of 2015. By this time, the civil war between former comrades in arms had lasted longer than the 2011 war to unseat Muammar Qadhafi. A period of hope had followed his death, marked by the first national elections in decades. Then came the fracturing and descent into civil war. The resulting vacuum allowed the Islamic State to establish its strongest branch outside Iraq and Syria. It enabled a surge of migrants from Africa, with thousands perishing before they ever reached the sea or suffering horrific abuses at the hands of smugglers. And it drew in competing Arab powers, whose supply of weapons to Libya's warring militias only prolonged the misery. Meanwhile, the Americans and Westerners had fled. One evening at a cluster of apartments just before sunset, Tariq got caught in a hail of gunfire coming from the north. He scrambled for cover. One of his friends was hit in the leg and the chest with heavy-caliber rounds. The young man died quickly. Moments later, Tariq felt a stabbing pain in his upper thigh and fell to the ground. The femur bone that joins the leg to the hip is wrapped in a bundle of arteries, nerves, and muscle. Even a normal fracture from a fall, for instance, can cause bleeding, clotting, and death. A wound from a high-velocity bullet is catastrophic. If the bullet severs or even nicks the femoral artery, a person will lose enough blood to die within minutes. In Tariq's case, the bullet was smaller than those that had killed his friend. It missed the artery, but smashed the bone and lodged in his thigh. At a field clinic, they set his leg with plastic cartons and moved him to a port south of Benghazi, where they planned to evacuate him to Misrata, a city to the west. But shelling had forced a delay. Tariq waited all through the night, with no anesthetic. The next day, they loaded him on a small wooden boat along with the other wounded. When the motor failed, they waited through the interminable night as shells fell around them. Dawn crept slowly over the horizon. The waves pushed the powerless boat closer and closer to shore. Like Tariq, I wondered, how did this happen? How does a country reach such a point? This book is an attempt to find an answer. It traces the arc of Libya's post-Qadhafi journey from euphoria and hope to despair and war. Based on years of travel and reporting across the country, from the revolution's end to the present, it narrates the experiences of Libyans who sought to bend the new order to their will and were irrevocably changed in the process. It tries to find the turning points and missteps that caused the splintering of Libya, which I believe was not preordained after the fall of Qadhafi. Ultimately, I want to understand what it was that caused revolutionaries like Tariq and countless others to turn against one another. The harrowing of Libya today is part of a larger drama unfolding in the Arab world. the struggle of a region trying to remake its politics through violence and other forms of contention. It is too easy to dismiss the current chaos as inevitable, as the bitter proof of a revolution's dashed hopes. In fact, the battle for the new Libya is far from over. The battle is also a distinctly American saga, the tale of an intervention by a superpower chastened by its adventures in Iraq and Afghanistan, which this time acted from afar and absolved itself from the follow-up. Then came the attack on the U.S. diplomatic outpost in Benghazi, which killed 4 Americans and triggered endless partisan attacks at home. The Libya that exists in the American mind is ineluctably linked to that night and the Obama administration's response. The ensuing war within the Beltway is not a concern of this book, though I account for its impact on America's policy in Libya and on Libyan lives. I also believe that the histories and fates of Libya and America are more intertwined than many realize. Libya was once home to the largest overseas American military base in the world. More distantly, the opening verses of the Marines' Hymn, From the Halls of Montezuma to the Shores of Tripoli, reference an 1805 invasion by American Marines to unseat a troublesome Muslim ruler in what is now Libya and replace him with one more amenable to American interests. It was the young republic's first deployment of its military forces in foreign lands. A little more than 200 years later, America returned to the shores of Tripoli, this time from the air, intent on avoiding the sort of ground expedition recorded in the hymn of its Marines. What follows, then, is partly the story of that return and its consequences. Part 1. No Ownership. Chapter 1. The Tent Conquered the Castle. Late August in Tripoli is a time of forbearance. It is still a month before the easterly winds will start their slow assault on the dulling heat. Flowering bougainvilleas have long since bloomed and now dangle down the sides of white-walled villas. At night, families emerge to stroll on a seaside promenade. Backgammon players crowd the porticoed cafes of Algeria Square. It is Ramadan, 2009, and in just a few weeks it will be 40 years since Muammar Qadhafi came to power. In preparation, louvered shutters across the city are freshly painted green, the official color of the dictator's state of the masses. In Green Square, in the shadow of an ancient citadel, workers sweep parade grounds and erect scaffolding on vast stages. A jumbotron video screen looms overhead, ready to broadcast the coming pageantry. Troops of Boy Scouts practice marching. Qadhafi's visage is everywhere on billboards. In one, a gallery of revolutionary icons, Mandela, Guevara, Nehru, and Nasser, flanks the smiling dictator in Bedouin headgear. In another, a crowd gathers before a green tent, emanating rays of light. The crowd is waving their hands as if in gratitude or supplication. The tent conquered the castle, reads the wording above. Muammar al-Qadhafi was born in a tent, a woven, goat-hair dwelling that is typical among roaming Bedouin, on June 7, 1942, near a village called Qasr Abu Khadi. He grew up in a sparse country. The village sits on the Gulf of Sidra, on a rocky plain flecked with acacia and thorn scrub. Libya then was one of the poorest countries in the world, a nation of mostly illiterate farmers, fishermen, and pastoralists, like his father. The tribe at the time was the dominant unit of social and political organization, and in his final years, after flirting with assorted ideologies, Qadhafi returned to this tribal milieu, ending his rule with an ethos of the desert and leaving a legacy of desert-like desolation. Libya has always been a place on the margins. The name itself is borrowed from a term first used by the ancient Egyptians to describe the inhabitants on their western borders. In the classical imagination, it denoted all of Africa, a realm of wonders and terrors. Libya is the world's third part, wrote the Roman poet Lucan. Serpents, thirst, the heat of the sand. Libya is the only thing that can put forth such a swarm of suffering. The Greeks, Carthaginians, and Romans passed through, settling mostly on a sliver of fertile coast where they built cities linking the Saharan south with the Mediterranean basin. The Arabs arrived in the 7th century, displacing the remnants of the Byzantine Empire and Christianity, and starting a long process of Islamization. During the nearly 4 centuries of Ottoman rule, Libya remained a backwater. The Ottomans and their principalities never fully controlled it, but rather governed through pacts with local notables. The Italians arrived in 1911, latecomers to European imperialism, and wrested the territory from the Turks, resurrecting the ancient term Libya to stress the region's Roman antecedents. They set about colonizing it, luring Italian settlers to emigrate with exaggerated promises of empty farmland. They joined the historic provinces of Tripolitania, to the west, Cyrenaica or Barca, the east, and Fezzan, the south, under a single governor. With the rise of the fascists in Italy came a decade of unrelenting military conquest, marked by aerial bombardment and poison gas. The trauma of that period remains today. To be sure, the Italians imprinted Libya with asphalt highways and buildings, but they did little for Libyans themselves, shutting them out of education or any role in governance. Their farming projects subverted the economy of pastoralism. Their brutal counterinsurgency imprisoned 2/3 of the population in eastern Libya in concentration camps. By some estimates, 1 out of every 5 persons in the country perished as a result of Italian rule. But the colonial era also gave rise to one of Libya's great legends, the Sufi teacher turned guerrilla leader, Omar al-Mukhtar. For nearly 2 decades before his capture and execution, at the age of 73, Omar al-Mukhtar fought the Italians across the eastern Green Mountains with a band of fighters numbering no more than 1,000. A lesser-known Libyan combatant in that struggle was the father of Muammar Qadhafi, whose exploits later hagiographies would laud and embellish. The Libya that his only son, Muammar, grew up in stood on the cusp of great change. After World War II, the country was administered by the victorious British and French militaries, remaining bereft of any political institutions, with the exception of a Sufi revivalist movement under the Sanusi dynasty. The Sanusi proto-state gave way to the monarchy after independence. On December 24, 1951, Muhammad Idris, the diffident scholarly grandson of the Sanusi order's founder, became the ruler of the United Kingdom of Libya. His reign was relatively peaceful, but far from successful. Infrastructure and education were underdeveloped, and the country was mired in poverty. Years of famine killed and displaced thousands. The literacy rate barely rose above 10%. The discovery of oil in the 1950s. Libya has the largest reserves in Africa and the 9th largest in the world, did little to improve things. "I wish your people had discovered water," Idris reportedly told an American diplomat. "Water makes men work. Oil makes men dream." Idris also opened Libya to American and British military bases, yet these allies looked uneasily on his rule and his staying power. The king offers Libya no inspiring leadership. a 1953 CIA assessment noted. In fact, he seems more interested in retiring to his ancestral hills and allowing the infant state to disintegrate. As is often the case, the first steps toward modernization taken by a sclerotic king are his last. Urbanization and education exposed young Libyans to the seductions of Arab nationalism. On September 1, 1969, a group of such Libyans, army officers who'd been cadets together at Benghazi's military college, overthrew King Idris in a bloodless coup. Like Muammar Qadhafi, the captain who became their leader, many hailed from rural backgrounds and lesser tribes, shut out from the cronyism of the monarchy. What followed in the months ahead was an attempt by Qadhafi to replicate the rule of his idol, Gamal Abdel Nasser, in neighboring Egypt. The recipe would involve a mix of socialism and pan-Arabism, with the nationalization of foreign banks and oil companies and the closure of foreign military bases. Negotiations for the departure of the Americans had already been underway during King Idris's rule. The new regime set about purging the last vestiges of the monarchy, especially the Sanusi endowments. But the putschist officers lacked the administrative and economic skills to run the country. In 1973, buoyed by the quadrupling of oil prices and an infusion of sudden wealth, Qadhafi embarked on a decades-long political experiment at home and militant adventurism abroad. The dictator first turned inward, codifying his musings into a multi-volume tract called the Green Book. Breathtaking in scope and incoherence, the Green Book was a farrago of socialism, democracy, and capitalism. Put into practice, it resulted in the deinstitutionalization of Libya and the dismantling of the professional bureaucracy, to be replaced by various popular committees and people's militias. Libya was proclaimed in 1977 to be a state of the masses, or Jamahiriya, an Arabic neologism coined by Qadhafi himself. A series of drastic reforms accompanied the new experiment. Some had a positive impact. Literacy rose to 82%, and a free healthcare system expanded across the country. Women's status improved as well. Laws forbidding polygamy and child brides were implemented, and women were afforded access to higher education. Yet, other, more radical initiatives proved catastrophic. Believing that renting was a form of tyranny, Qadhafi allowed tenants to claim ownership of land and dwellings. He exhorted workers to seize businesses and turn them into collectives, banned private land ownership, and created state supermarkets. The result was the gutting of the entrepreneurial class and its flight abroad. Radicalism at home was matched by radicalism abroad. Anti-imperialism, anti-Westernism, and anti-Zionism had long been hallmarks of Qadhafi's worldview. Now, buttressed by newfound oil wealth, he used Libya to project that ideology, training a wide array of militants, including Palestinian groups, the Irish Republican Army, European and Latin American leftists, African insurgents, and even South Pacific separatists. By one count, more than 30 organizations passed through Libyan camps. It wasn't just unconventional warfare that defined Libya's bellicosity abroad. Qadhafi embroiled Libya in a disastrous 9-year war with neighboring Chad over a uranium-rich piece of border territory called the Aouzou Strip. By the early 1980s, this militancy had brought Libya into confrontation with America, especially the administration of Ronald Reagan, who famously called the dictator the mad dog of the Middle East. In 1986, citing evidence of Qadhafi's complicity in the bombing of a West Berlin disco that killed American soldiers, Reagan sent fighter bombers to strike Libya's terrorist training facilities. Dubbed Operation El Dorado Canyon, the raid destroyed a number of camps and military targets, killing roughly 40 soldiers and civilians, with the loss of one American aircraft and its 2-person crew. The attack, also resulted in a gradual
Sample complete. Ready to continue?